there, I'm Harold George, Extension Services Manager for the St. Johns County Public Library System, and I had the honor this last fall to talk to someone named David Taylor, who is the producer of a film called Soul of a People. That film and the accompanying book, which is about the Works Project Administration, WPA, Writers Project, is something the library system owns, and we'll be showing that film at the Waterworks building next to the main library on Sunday, May 1st at 2 p.m. This is a partnership with the library system, the St. John's Cultural Council, and the Friends of the Library, and we are so honored to show a snapshot of the rich legacy that has been part of St. Johns County for many years, and that this Works Project Administration during the Great Depression helped record and highlight some of the cultural influences and treasures that still are with us today. People like Zora Neale Hurston and Stetson Kennedy were very important to the production of stories and recordings. The Florida Traveler's Guide, which was published in 1939, that was produced through the Works Project Administration. Our library system owns a reprint of it. There's still original copies out there that are available for purchase if you want to shop around. But what really inspired me about this film is that we have such a rich legacy here in Florida and in St. Johns County, and sometimes there are bits and pieces of our history that are overlooked as we race towards the next horizon of something exciting, development, growth, and that these pieces of time, this artwork, these treasures, this history are still intact because someone had the foresight to say, let's put these people to work. And so I hope you enjoyed this film and the interview about David Taylor, Soul of a People. Thank you so much. What was the moment or the idea or the inspiration that hooked you and said, we need to make this film?
That's a great question, Harold. And first, let me just thanks to the St. Johns County libraries. And I really, libraries were so important in the development of this story, first as an article, and then as a book, and then as a film, that I love to connect with the people who use libraries and the St. Johns County libraries. That's such a rich story that you're pursuing. So yes, that's a great question. I had no idea about the Federal Writers Project or the WPA much until about 20 years ago, and it started with a kind of a chance encounter. A friend of mine knew that I was going to take a trip to New Orleans soon after that, and she lent me her copy, actually her parents' copy of the 1938 WPA Guide to New Orleans. And so I took it along with me. I put it in the trunk for the trip, and I thought this is probably not going to be very helpful. It's a guidebook, a travel guide that's about 50 years out of date. But when my wife and I got to New Orleans, we found that that WPA guide had such a ground level view of and a personal voice of places that were off the beaten track. It was not like a slick travel guide at all. This was really sort of a close local stories of visiting the famous New Orleans cemeteries, for example. We found the guidebook, the WPA guide, had explanations for how there was connections from the furniture in that cemetery to lawn furniture we found in the 20th century. And so there were just a lot of personal examples and a fresh voice of what the connection between people's culture and history were. And so that it actually piqued my interest. It made me wonder about these other guidebooks in the WPA Guide series. It was a series of a guidebook for each state, and plus a bunch of cities like New Orleans and like New York and a number in Florida. And I thought that it would be interesting to learn more about the stories of the people behind whom created these things, who had gone. I found out that the Federal Writers Project basically recruited from people who were unemployed during the Depression, who really needed the jobs and who got this assignment, not because they wanted to research places like in their neighborhoods or landmarks, but who had to for a paycheck. And then they found themselves getting more and more interested as they got into the work. So that kind of evolved into an article I did for Smithsonian. And then I spoke with a DC filmmaker, Andrea Kalin, who we worked together before, and she agreed this would be a great way into shared stories of America. And so we really just, we applied for funds from the National Endowment for the Humanities and made the film.
I rewatched the film just yesterday and over the past 2 days. And one of the things that struck me is that, it seemed that at some point someone said, well, writers need to eat as well. We need to work. They weren't exactly sure what they were going to do with these writers. And so it occurred at one point that it made sense to give them this, what appears to be a practical job. Let's do a travel guide. And perhaps something a little bit different came about, but certainly something much more rich. And fortunately, as many challenges as the WPA in general received and the Writers Project, it sounds like the legacy of this project survived, and especially after they realized that, we need to drum up interest and patriotism and what makes America America during World War II.
You're right. Yeah, it really, it was controversial during its time in the 30s and during the administration of President Franklin Roosevelt. There was a lot of opposition to the idea of the government employing people, especially when it was a crisis. And there wasn't, what are you doing hiring people to just go out and write stories about their hometowns? But yeah, after the guidebooks came out mostly in the late 1930s, like the Florida guidebook came out in 1939 and was well received. And then in World War II, as you say, it got reframed, and the guidebooks were seen as really a way of saying, this is what we're fighting for. All these stories in this guidebook and all this history that we've shared, kind of like from a ground up, every person's point of view, this is a valuable piece of work. So it did kind of reframe how we saw those guidebooks, and most they were published mostly by private publishers. So it wasn't, they were real books, and they were most public libraries had a full collection of all these throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s. So it's a remarkable resource. Many libraries still have the WPA guides.
I remember in my early days of theater training, and I always would bump up against these monologues from a play called Working by Studs Terkel. So it was a real treat to actually get a little more exposure to him through your film. And it made sense, of course, that Working would be such a big, important work for him, considering that so much of his work came to fruition during the struggles of the Great Depression. And then, of course, Zora Neale Hurston and Stetson Kennedy. We have a special interest here in Florida and St. Johns County because of them. Was Zora Neale someone you were familiar with as part before this project came along?
Yes, I had really enjoyed the flavor, just her distinct voice in novels like Their Eyes Were Watching God. Before, I had majored in English in college, so I think in the course of one of the American literature courses, I had read that book, and then I was intrigued and later read her memoir, Dust Tracks on the Road. And again, I just was her vital and vibrant voice, and the details that she showed about the characters that she had met, and the cultures across Florida that she encountered really intrigued me. So she was definitely one, when we got into this project, that I was intrigued to follow. And yeah, we were so glad to be able to find both the audio and film archival pieces that she had done now in the Library of Congress. And so we were able to actually show in some ways that hadn't been seen so much before, the sounds and the visuals of her at work as an anthropologist and gathering stories and gathering people's voices.
I'd like to ask you a couple questions as far as the process of making the film or what you experienced, because one of the things that we sort of take it for granted around here is the fact that we can visit Stetson Kennedy's home, the Loothahatchee, and there's this great shot of him on the deck, and you can see the water behind him. Were you able to travel much for the making of this, or did you have to rely a lot on like archival footage or a combination of work?
No, actually, it was really gratifying to have the opportunity to visit with Stetson at Beluthahatchee and to interview him there, and to actually go with him to revisit some of the places where he and Zora Neale Hurston had done interviews, like at the Clara White mission in Jacksonville, and to hear his stories of that time, and really to retrace, as you say, I mean, Zora Neale Hurston's didn't get acknowledged as much in her time, but she's influenced so many. I mean, Alice Walker really kind of restored her the public's idea of Zora Neale Hurston's contribution, and it continues to be recognized. I mean, the interviews that she did with she started with the formerly enslaved people in the 30s really kind of served as an inspiration and template for the whole Federal Writers Project's program of interviewing the people who had survived slavery and getting their stories down. And then her idea of recording songs and stories across the Gulf Coast using equipment that was really cutting art, state of the art at that point of audio equipment in the field. She was just brilliant. But being able to hear Stetson Kennedy's accounts of going with her and going to turpentine camps and really facing danger to get those stories and songs, it was really a highlight for me as a writer and as working in film.
One of the things, I mean, I enjoy documentaries of all sorts, and just a personal observation. Sometimes I'm always fascinated by what I refer to or think as random imagery or random video portions that may not necessarily actually be a true representation of what's being discussed, but I guess it'd be more of a presentational. And one of the things that I remember, and of course I wrote myself this note, and the note's sitting across the room, so let's see if I can do it. But there's I think it's Zora. No. Okay, it was the Oneida Reservation and the Oneida, a Native American project. And there's a lady who's reading and discussing the challenges. And at the same time, rather than showing the faces of the Oneida, you're showing faces of what I would like to refer to as a homogenous set of Americans with expressions on their face that makes me think they were not necessarily inclined to care about the people that you hear speaking. And I thought that was a really cool way of illustrating the tension that existed between the value of this project and a lot of people who didn't see that value at all. How much of what you found as far as footage goes informed what you decided to do, and how much of it was like, I like this idea, I'm going to see what I can find?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And the sequence that you mentioned about the Oneida branch of the Iroquois in Wisconsin, and how the part of the Federal Writers Project was to kind of get their language and stories down. And you're right, there was a letter we found to a congressman by a white Wisconsin farmer saying, what's the government doing funding this? It's not valuable to me. We wanted to, it was the idea of this audience, this national audience, sort of responding to the Oneida Project, to the idea of getting Native American stories with skepticism. And there was a lot of that at that point. So that really is a case where the visuals and the footage came from the idea of showing this audience that was of a different perspective than the stories that we were getting. So in a lot of cases, it was our search for visuals and audio was driven by wanting to represent the context either of an audience or of a national listening audience, say to the radio programs, or the performers and the speakers themselves. But so we were fortunate to have several really great film researchers going through public and private collections, finding people's home movies, finding audio from radio programs, and from public collections. So there was a lot of work to see what we could use, and then to be guided by what we needed to use to really tell this story. And so I give credit to Andrea and her team, James Mirabello, another researcher and producer on the program, just did a remarkable job.
There's a shot of a boy sliding down a rail on his feet, and I think to myself, you could easily go down a wormhole and find yourself 8 hours later still not deciding what to use. It must have been a challenge to do that.
There were a lot of choices, and you're right, it reflects, a lot of these, the images that kind of are unexpectedly sort of day-to-day life things, they do show that the guidebooks and the WPA writers themselves were wanting to, they had a mandate to show America warts and all. And so that was both, it was very much away from the sort of the journalistic focused on what is the news of the day, and it's more on how people are living from day to day, whether it's things, obstacles they face in daily life, or celebrations of local culture. And both of those things were what it's really a pleasure to find in the writers' work then, and what they were, how they were inspired to work even after they got out of the Depression.
I have a friend who prides himself on identifying voices without anybody telling him who he was, and immediately he knew that was Patricia Clarkson, who was narrating the film. And did you go into it hoping Patricia Clarkson was going to be your narrator, or was she one of the people that was suggested? Or, to me, that seems like such an important choice that could really change the feel of the movie, and yet she seemed like the perfect choice.
Oh, thanks. I'm glad you appreciated that, felt that way too. We felt from the start she would be sort of a moonshot. She had several Oscar nominations at that point, so she was very much a reach in terms of getting her, but she had a quality of voice, and a particular voice. It was a very, and we knew we wanted kind of that, her quality of voice and storytelling in the narrator. And so we were just, Andrea reached out to her through her agent, and we're just fortunate that the story resonated for her, and that we got our first choice.
I'm the youngest in a large family. I'm what you might refer to as a late life kid. My dad I think he was 44 or 45 when I was born. He spent he's up until the age of 16, he lived on Lake Okeechobee. So it's kind of interesting. He's probably grew up with families that might have been featured in some of these films. But one of the things that my dad was in his adult life was an excellent curler and an excellent ice skater. And for some reason, I never knew until well into my 20s or 30s that he learned to do these things in Utah at a WPA camp. My father was one of those people employed by the Works Projects Administration, which, is, I think that's something to be proud of, because it showed that it actually touched many, if not all, families throughout this country. So I appreciate you highlighting this more creative side to it. I know that they also had a theater project, if I remember correctly. I'd read a little bit about that through a time. Probably my final question, as far as one of the things I'm always fascinated by too, is sound and music in film. Was any, if not all, of the music in the public domain, or was some of this originally composed for the film? It's a mix-up of the two.
Well, thanks for sharing that personal connection, because I think that really does get at the point that in looking back, sometimes we find through our family's experiences, there were connections that we didn't suspect to these programs that had such a wide impact, and that they not just a sort of national and political impact, but they have personal resonance through families. And I think we've been gratified to hear how audiences have responded. And just one point that with our filmmaker, the director Andrea Kalin and I have gone back into these stories and feeling like this is a valuable one to look at. And we've revisited the subject in the context of the current pandemic too, to see what we can learn still from these stories. And so we're working on a podcast called The People's Recorder that will be available in the next couple of months, and that that I hope, we start with several episodes in Florida, and the continuing look at the legacy of, in particular, Zora Neale Hurston and Stetson Kennedy and the other Florida writers, federal writers, in how we look at the world today and what that can show us. But to your question about the music, yes, a lot of it was from the film came from public collections and from the public domain. But really, the kind of the through line is we got a composer, Joseph Vitarelli, who did wonderful work on the score. And I think that he just, he found kind of a poetic feel for the different threads of kind of where there was sort of a celebration. There was the times of, there's a theme for sort of the challenge and the controversy of the WPA and the hard aspects of it. And he just really brought a poetic feel to the story that really makes the film really rich and powerful for me. He later went on to work on other great films like My Architect, another interesting documentary, and he did the score for the HBO series John Adams. So
wow,
just a great credit.
That's great. I mean, I follow a few composers. I'm still rooting one day for Thomas Newman that he's going to get that Oscar. I'm grateful that you mentioned the People's Recorder, because I think that if we all could take more time to have a look at what people experienced during the Great Depression, it might have served us well with the perspective and the experience that we're going through right now. And one of the things I've read a book many years ago that I want to pick up again was F. Scott Fitzgerald's unfinished book, The Last Tycoon, because what that book did for me, for the very first time, it dawned on me like people were seriously concerned about the political scene of the Great Depression. We hear about the poverty and the struggles, but we don't necessarily hear about the real fear of communism and revolution that many people have felt during that era. And of course, we're going through a lot of political upheaval now. And at the same time, it's the stories of the people experiencing it, which seems to give us some grounding perspective that I'm really, really can't wait to hear your podcast. I would love to know more about it as it comes out. Is this something that, as far as the interviews go, is it ongoing, or is this something you've completed and you're working with your editing process now?
We finished the first recording of the interviews with the first 2 episodes in Florida, and so we're finalizing those. Those should be ready very soon. So we're very happy with the kind of the range of people we've talked with for that, and going back into the recordings from the 30s too, and kind of bringing those together. And it's just very striking.
Also, our local cultural council is responsible for the care and administration of a building that houses a lot of dance performance studios type spaces. And that building is actually built in 1938 or 39 with the Works Project Administration. And they have just achieved their first of hopefully 2 steps for National Historic Registry. So we're going to use that as an opportunity to share information about your movie and your book, and now this new podcast as well. So we appreciate all this information and your time today. This has been, something that I really have always been interested in. Can't help but share it. And librarians, we love these sort of things. We love stories, and we love to dig up old records. And I have to give a shout out to Amy Ackerman, who's our reference librarian at the main library. She is the person that introduced me to Soul of a People. And in the past few months that we've had conversations, she has gone down one of her wormholes, discovering all the WPA projects and people who have benefited from in St. Johns County. And I have a feeling there's a lot of families who are in a better place today because of this experience from 90 some odd years ago now. So thank you so much for this film.
Oh, well, thank you so much for bringing it to a spotlight again. And it sounds like a great combination of events and screenings. We'd love to be able to support that. I think the St. Johns County libraries and the conversations that you have made possible, I think, is just a really rich way for the community to look at these things that they don't otherwise might find. So I appreciate that, and thanks to Amy for bringing it up to the surface.